Conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have, I can't believe this story, scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less light and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show on this Sunday morning. Lovely to see you. And we have got such a show planned ahead. We're going to be speaking to the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, ahead of the big budget on Wednesday. Is it going to be as bad as the headline writers predict? Also be asking her, of course, about VAT on private school fees and whether Labour are going to abandon that controversial policy. We've got both Tory leadership candidates in, only a few days of voting to go by the Tory membership. That vote ends on Halloween, and then we'll get the winner next Saturday. So I'll be speaking to Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, who, by the way, have had a little bit of a go against each other in today's Sunday Telegraph. So I'll be quizzing them both on that. Also going to be speaking to Reform's Deputy Leader Richard Tice. He wants to have a go at the budget that he thinks is going to land Britain in a lot of trouble on Wednesday. And he wants to talk to us about that Manchester airport attack. Still no charges having been brought, despite allegations that police officers were assaulted. And I'm going to be speaking to former Tory party treasurer Lord Farmer. He's got something to say about the early prisoner release scheme, and I think on this show is going to announce who he's backing for Tory leader. So as ever, we've got 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead. Don't go anywhere. Let's get stuck into the Sunday papers now with my Telegraph colleague Madeline Grant, who is a sketch writer for the newspaper as well as a columnist. Madeline, lovely to see you this morning. So the paper's brimming with warnings about what could be a new Black Wednesday. I mean, I don't know whether Labour are just managing expectations here by saying it's going to be economic doom for taxpayers. And actually, it's a bit better than that. But we've got the Sunday Telegraph's headline, "Businesses shut up shop ahead of budget for growth." We've got the Mail on Sunday talking about Starmer's double lie over 40 billion tax splits. This is about this confusion over what a working person is.
Yes.
Tell us a bit more about what's been reported this morning.
Well, it's quite a mixed bag. It's an interesting, as you say, there are some very, very doom and gloom headlines here, and it's not just the headline. I mean, the story in the Sunday Telegraph is talking about specific data that 1,600 business owners are folding their businesses before the budget in anticipation of it, and that rate is much higher than it has been at other times of the year, so it does suggest that it is budget-related. However, I've also seen in some other interviews, for example, in Tim Shipman's piece in the Sunday Times, that there also seems to be some effort by Labour to counteract this narrative, to kind of put out there that it's not going to be as bad as people might think, you know, that actually there won't be these dramatic changes and so forth. So it seems like they're as ever caught between their two forms of their comms strategy. That firstly, to say that the situation is much worse than we feared, and oh dear, this requires very tough action.
22 billion black hole.
But also not so much that you spook the market, which already seems to be happening. I mean, the price of government debt has increased, and that could have a dramatic effect on our ability to borrow and fund so much of Labour's manifestos.
Exactly. It's kind of this balancing act. I think what we do know, Madeleine, because I see that the Labour press office haven't briefed against the idea of national insurance contributions made by employers going up.
Yes.
I'm going to be quizzing Bridget Phillipson about that later, because that strikes me as a clear manifesto breach. They said they weren't going to put up national insurance. We can have a debate about what working people are, but that seems to me to be going back on a promise.
Absolutely.
But there's also talk about capital gains tax rises. There's talk about perhaps some tweaks to inheritance tax. They're saying that working people... I think we had Lisa Nandy in the week describing a working person as a bus driver, but not someone that owns a small business, which strikes me as confused in its thinking. Are we now going back to the days where a working person is someone who clocks in and out on, you know, like literally that old TV series Clocking Off in some kind of northern factory?
Yeah.
That isn't the definition of a working person these days.
Well, it's absolute sophistry, because many of the people, as you say, who they define as not a working person, work extremely hard and pay an awful lot of tax, and are probably feeling quite hard-pressed already, and are very concerned about what is to come and what that means for the state of wealth creation and job creation in Britain. But I almost think that they made a mistake, which was when they said working people, they meant working-class people, but they're too embarrassed to talk about class. It's an uncomfortable conversation. So that by using that vague term, they've become essentially a victim of their own linguistic sophistry.
Precisely. They have. They're going to be caught up with their own sort of strange definitions, I feel.
And it is a ridiculous... I mean, the sight of the Prime Minister trying to justify himself a couple of days ago, I mean, even people that would sympathise with raising taxes would look at that and say, this is so unclear, this is ludicrous.
Well, his father was a toolmaker, I don't know if you knew, so that is certainly a working person, even though he apparently did run the factory that he made the tools
so probably not a working person.
Who knows? I'm confused. Now, this is a really quite chilling story, actually. The Sunday Times have caught up with the daughter of David Amess, that's the Tory MP that was killed in 2021 by a man called Ali Harbi Ali. They've spoken to his daughter, Katie. This is 3 years on from the attack, but it's made the quite remarkable and, frankly, horrifying revelation that Ali, the killer, was referred to the Home Office's Prevent programme by a teacher in 2014. But the case was closed after just one meeting. And the paper points out that he obviously spent the next years orchestrating and planning this lone wolf attack that cost David Amess his life. And it makes questions again, Maddie. It's not the first time we've talked about prevent and whether it actually does prevent terrorism.
No, absolutely not. And, you know, there are many cases of criminals who've been overlooked and have gone on to commit some kind of terrible crime, be that a regular crime or even indeed a terrorist crime. This is not even an isolated incident. I think part of the issue is also that, you know, David Amess was such a lovely man. He was much loved across the Commons. But even in the weeks that followed his murder, Parliament really wanted to talk about people saying nasty things online. You know, there wasn't a proper discussion about the fact that this was an Islamist terror attack. I feel like that was almost became a technicality. And I think perhaps we've become quite inured to these sorts of incidents. So when they happen, we forget about them and move on.
Let's have a look at this story, because time is, as ever, running out. On the Sunday Telegraph. So I can see Robert Jenrick, he's just arrived and he's coming on in after the break, so stay tuned for that. Badenoch, I have integrity to lead Tories, not Jenrick. She's making the point, I mean, we're in the end game of this whole race. She's making the point, oh, well, I never lost my job. She's referring to Robert Jenrick being sacked by Boris Johnson back in 2020 over this kind of controversy about allowing a housing development to go ahead by Richard Desmond, funny enough, my former boss at the Sunday Express. And it did land him in some hot water. I didn't know they were... Have the gloves come off, Madeline?
Oh, not sure that they were ever on, really.
Oh, really?
I mean, there's been a lot of briefing from both sides in the press. It's quite obvious, or at least it looks very much like it's coming from both camps. And it does make life quite difficult in the sense that there aren't all that many. There are so few MPs left that you kind of want all of your good people to be on the team when it comes to it.
Yes, I'm going to ask Kemi whether she would have Robert Jenrick in her team.
Yes.
Robert Jenrick, in turn, has said he would like somebody like Jacob Rees-Mogg, my colleague here at GB News, to be his party chairman. So we'll drill into that. We'll drill into whether this whole yellow card system, where they weren't meant to criticise each other, has fallen apart as we reach the end game. And then finally, let's have a chat about Kamala Harris over in America. We've got the US election now, I think, 9 days away. Beyonce has been out to campaign for the Democrats. Do we think that helps? How do we think... I mean, we've got these 7 key swing states. I think Trump's ahead in 4, they're tied on 2. There's some debate going on about who's ahead in Wisconsin. What's your view of how this is going?
I think celebrities getting involved in politics almost never helps the person they're trying to support.
Yes.
Or at the very least, I'm sure that I interpreted Beyonce's presence at the rally in Texas as being more like a kind of rally the flag thing, so to kind of amuse the troops who are then going to go out and continue the campaign in the coming weeks. But in terms of convincing anyone new, I mean, does anyone who doesn't already agree that they're voting for Kamala Harris, are they really going to be swayed by a wealthy celebrity?
On the campaign trail, so that's really one other. The point is, I don't know whether it persuades people who are wavering between Trump and Harris to suddenly go to Camp Harris. It's the same as the Taylor Swift endorsement. It kind of attracts as many people as it repels.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I think the Taylor Swift may have been more beneficial because her thing was, I suppose it wasn't as sort of overt as being at a rally, but it was saying, do register to vote. I think especially amongst, given the size of her following amongst young people in particular, may have helped. But at this stage, I think most people have made up their mind. And I don't think waverers are going to be convinced by Beyonce.
We'll be covering all developments here on GB News, as you would imagine. Thank you, Madeline Grant, for your expertise this morning. As I say, I can see Bobby J. He's out there waiting to come into the studio. Robert Jenrick, the man who wants to lead the Tories in opposition. Is he going to win? I'm going to be asking him that next. Don't go anywhere.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The number of pubs may reach critically low levels.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing is a decline in the number of pubs in Britain, and it's fallen. This is an absolutely astonishing figure. So it's basically fallen 10% in a decade. So do our maths. It doesn't take very long for that to happen. So if that carries on, we'd have, get this, only 1,000 pubs by 2074. So the big question is, what will become extinct first? The bank branch on your high street, or the pub on your street corner? And this is a kind of perfect storm for landlords and landladies of, the cost of labour. We saw, remember when the energy prices were at the high, we just realised just how much energy it keeps to keep the lights on in the local boozer. Yeah. As well as, as the cost of the golden nectar itself. So, as they call it in Australia.
Well, talking about that, I was mentioning the other day to, was it my father-in-law? I said, I used to, when I first started going to the pub, I was 15,
Okay.
Half a lemonade, half a shandy.
I was nearly 16, I got half a shandy. No, we used to have Monday Club, where a pint of Foster's was £1.50. And my father-in-law was saying, I went to London the other day, a pint was £8.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And when you've got those kind of prices, why wouldn't you just go down the supermarket and get 16 tinnies for £5?
So you're going all Aussie now. Put the tinnies in the esky before you have the barbie.
Good day, mate. Why not?
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree, actually. I think it's concerning. A lot of people look at the high streets and they're very concerned that it's looking quite glum, to be honest. You know, lots of things are closing. But the reality is it's because people are not buying from the high street. They're not going to the pub, you know. People are just deciding, you know, what they're going to do in their spare time. Are they really going to go to the pub, or are they going to potentially go to, you know, David Lloyd or a Nuffield, you know, join a gym membership? They're just looking at their expenses and just deciding, you know what, we're going to actually cut costs, you know.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Budget Day on GB News on Wednesday. Stay with us all day for the most anxiously anticipated budget in a generation.
Morning through to evening, we'll be here with insight and analysis, crunching the numbers
as we work out the cost to the country and, most importantly, to you.
Because the Chancellor has a bill to pay. The question is...
who's going to pay it? Budget Day all day Wednesday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to have Robert Jenrick in the studio. He's been on many times. He's the candidate that wants to replace Rishi Sunak as Tory leader. That is decided by the membership vote on... well, they finish voting on Thursday, Halloween, and then the winner is announced on Saturday. Also the MP for Newark, I should point out, Mr. Jenrick.
Good morning.
So we're in the end games of this, and there's a little bit...
pleasure to be here.
There's a bit of blue on blue in this Sunday Telegraph. Kemi Badenoch says that at least she has never been sacked and has suggested there's a whiff of impropriety about you. She's referring to the time that you were sacked by Boris Johnson. This was over you granting permission for Richard Desmond to do that development in West Ferry. That meant that he could have saved a potential 40 million quid. You then had to go back on that decision. At the time, you accepted that your decision was technically unlawful but denied any bias, though lawyers acting for you did admit the case could lead to the fair-minded observer to conclude that there was a possibility of bias. So you were involved in a bit of controversy back in 2020 that saw you lose your job. She makes a point then, doesn't she, about impropriety? Is there a whiff of impropriety about you, Mr. Jenrick?
Well, look, firstly, on the issue itself, I'd just note that a couple of weeks ago, the Labour-controlled Tower Hamlets Council approved the very same scheme.
Yes.
All these years later, millions of pounds wasted, and I will never be ashamed of trying to get homes built in this country.
I know.
Getting young people onto the housing ladder.
Hang on a minute.
But the point about Kemi's remarks in the paper, let me address that directly. I am proud of the way this long contest has been conducted. Pretty, Mel, Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly. We have worked together as a team. We've debated ideas and policies. It is a great shame that Kemi has chosen at this last minute to sully that, to trade personal attacks
hang on,
and
there are
insults.
people on behalf of you. There are people on behalf of you. Go on.
If Kemi does this to Conservative colleagues, this will be the death of the Conservative Party. I want to end the drama. I want to end these petty disputes, the misinformation.
Yeah.
The public are sick to death of this.
OK, hang on a minute.
This kind of garbage needs to end now.
All right, but supporters of yours, like David Campbell-Bannerman, they've been tweeting out all sorts of things. Picture of Kemi and then the words missing. Have you seen Kemi's plan? Neither have we. We've also had briefings coming out of your camp in some way or other, your supporters or whatever, describing Kemi Badenoch as crazy and lazy. So I don't think anyone's particularly behaved with any honour.
With respect, these comments are just pure garbage.
Yeah.
This is misinformation. This is petty personal attacks. I want to unite the Conservative Party.
Yes.
Your viewers are sick of this rubbish. They want it to end. You cannot claim to be a unity candidate and go making ad hominem attacks on Conservative colleagues.
Right.
If this is the manner in which Kemi would conduct herself as leader of the party has no future. It has to end.
I'm going to ask her that because she's coming on after you. But at this point, I mean, you're deflecting slightly from the issue here. You have this dinner where you sit next to Richard Desmond. Suddenly you're approving his development before there's a rise in council community charges, which would have put 40 million on his bill.
No, that's simply not correct.
No, but you were sacked. Why were you sacked then? Why did Boris Johnson sack you?
Well, you'd have to ask Boris, but...
Why do you think you were sacked?
Because Boris decided to row back on planning reforms, something he subsequently said that he regrets, and which would have enabled us to help hundreds of thousands of young people onto the housing ladder. I'll never regret helping to get our economy going, build homes for young people, ensure that our cities are regenerated. That is a key part of my mission. And if I'm leader of this party, I will unite it.
OK.
I will bring together the whole Conservative team. I will never make ad hominem attacks on our Conservative family. That is the opposite of what your viewers want.
OK, in that vein, why hasn't Michael Gove supported you? Didn't you work for him? Weren't you his PPS once?
I don't know, you'd have to ask Michael. Michael is a long-standing supporter
Why doesn't he want to back
Kemi.
Jenrick?
I don't know. Michael has for many years helped to run Kemi's campaign, as I understand it. You'd have to ask him what his views are.
Oh, yes.
I think
Do you still think Michael Gove is involved in her campaign?
I've no idea, but he's certainly not supporting me. That's what he said publicly. I think that the old guard of the Conservative Party, we need to turn a page on that.
OK.
We've got to look fresher and more energetic. We've got to tackle the issues of today. The ones I've spoken about, like reforming the NHS, ensuring our economy grows faster, tackling immigration and securing our borders.
But don't you think that some people don't want to back you because of this journey you've been on? There's a bit of confusion in your standpoint. We've talked about this before on the show. You're a Remainer who's now advocating leave and leaving the ECHR. Back in 2021, you called for a liberal immigration policy. Now you're calling for something completely different.
No, what you're quoting there is a comment that I made that I think has been given to you by my opponent's team.
No, actually, it was given to me by my producer, Tim Smith.
These comments, I went on to say that we need to have an immigration system which is controlled, that we skill up our domestic workforce. What did you mean by liberal immigration policy? I want the UK to attract the best and the brightest. Of course, I've always said that. What I don't want to have is the world and his wife and all their extended family coming into our country. That's why I fought relentlessly for the biggest change to our immigration system for a generation. That will reduce the number coming in by 300,000.
OK.
And when I couldn't get more, I chose to resign. Everyone else in the cabinet at the time, including my rival in this contest, went along with the system as it was. I knew that was wrong, that it was corrosive to the public's trust and confidence in our party. It was ultimately going to lead to massive electoral defeat, as it did, and we needed to change the system.
Do you think that Nigel Farage's Britain, do you still think this is angry, intolerant, limited and sepia-coloured? Because quite a lot of our audience quite like Nigel Farage's image of Britain.
But look, I have some time for Nigel. He and I agree on many issues, but I don't think he's a serious politician. I don't think he's got the answers to the problems that our country is facing. I have, and he's rattled, Camilla. He doesn't want me to be leader of this party because he doesn't want somebody who has a track record on these issues, who ultimately resigned on principle over them, so cannot be dismissed, and who has serious policies, capping legal migration in the tens of thousands in Parliament, leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. If we do those things, we'll bring home those small C Conservatives who should believe in our party. We should be their natural home.
To be fair, I don't think anyone thinks that those two policies are unserious at all. I agree with you. There may be a lack of seriousness with you thinking when you haven't got the support of 2/3 of Tories that
well,
you
no,
can
no
convince...
candidate has, Camilla.
Exactly.
No
so how are you going to convince these Tories both to agree to a migration cap, and we know many on the more liberal wing of the party won't. And second of all, how on earth are you going to convince them to leave the ECHR? This has been a thorn in the side of many, many Tory leaders, this whole divide over
I'm not so
Europe
sure of
and
that.
the ECHR.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm not so sure about that, Camilla. If you asked me 2 years ago, when I advocated for reform of the ECHR, whether every one of the leadership contenders this summer would agree that the ECHR is not working and needs reform, I would have said probably not. The debate has shifted so much, and I would like to think I've contributed to that. Today, everyone agrees it's not working in the interest of the British people. I'm just taking the argument one logical step further. It can't be reformed. I have looked into that. I've travelled around Europe. I've spoken to our counterparts. I've discussed this with the leading lawyers here and abroad. It cannot be reformed. Therefore, we do have to leave and replace it with a British Bill of Rights. And then we'll use all of our talents within the Conservative Party to discuss and debate what comes next.
I absolutely get the benefits of your policy, and I'm sure that lots of people listening and watching to this will agree. Yeah, let's leave the ECHR. The point that I'm making is that you've turned this into leave or remain, and that's the kind of debate that's actually going to divide the party again, not unite it. That's the argument.
It's just the truth, though, Camilla.
But
There's
it's
a
not
simple
going to
debate.
unite colleagues. It's actually going to divide colleagues. And that's the problem that's been going on for the last, not just 14 years, but since Maastricht.
What's the alternative? The alternative is what my rival suggests, which is just to bury our heads in the sand, pretend this issue doesn't exist, and hope that we can find a solution in months or years to come. That is a recipe for more infighting and division. And now today she's trading personal attacks with people.
Yeah.
I want to unite the party. I want to bring everyone together, and I want to do it with substance and policies.
But I make the
that
point
is the way in which we drive real unity in the
but
party.
I say this about unity, and I appreciate that they're former Tories, and maybe that's a good thing, but the likes of Michael Gove and indeed George Osborne not supporting you over this issue is emblematic of something.
But I'm not the candidate of the Tory establishment. So if your viewers, want the status quo, I'm probably not the right person.
But how on earth are you going to win over One Nation Tories that regard the idea of leaving the ECHR as ludicrous and in defiance of our international treaty obligations? I appreciate that that's not what you agree with, but I'm saying you've got to win these Tories over, and you're not going to be able to do it.
I disagree. Look at the people who are supporting me. A very broad range of people from all wings of the party. And what's the alternative? It's just to continue with the status quo, which is harming British people. You're seeing foreign criminals like rapists and murderers on our streets who we can't remove. Terrorists who are having to follow day and night because we can't deport them. Borders increasingly insecure, with thousands of people crossing. If I'm leader of this party, these problems will be resolved. If my rival is, and we never leave the European Convention on Human Rights, they'll persist for years, perhaps decades to come. I don't think that is a responsible thing to do.
Can we talk about Trump? Initially, you sort of warmed to the idea of saying that you'd rather Trump than Harris won the US election, and then you pulled back from it. Can you just state now who you think would be the better candidate for the world to win on November the 5th?
Well, look, I've said all along, I am a Conservative. It is natural for Conservatives to lean towards Republican candidates. Donald Trump is the Republican candidate. I don't think it's sensible for me or anyone else in this country to be explicitly endorsing one candidate or another. We would have to work and should work productively and constructively with whoever is President of the United States. You look what the Labour Party is doing. They've gone and sent 100 of their staffers to go and actively campaign for one of the candidates. That is damaging the UK's national interest, because you're going to find if one wins, the opposite candidate to the one you support, the relationship is weakened. So I'm not going to get into that. That is ultimately a question for the people of the United States. But I've been very clear. I'm a Conservative. I support Republicans. I think that's a sensible conclusion.
Do you think Trump is a fascist?
I don't support everything that Donald Trump says. He said some very foolish things.
Is he a fascist, though?
I don't trade those sorts of insults.
Would he fit your definition of a fascist?
I'm not. You can ask me that question as many times as you want.
Well, I just want. You're a very intelligent man. I
don't think it's sensible for me to get into trading insults with someone who, in a few weeks' time, could be the President-elect of the United States. If I'm leader of this party, I will need to have a good relationship with him, or indeed with Kamala Harris.
But thinking about it, hang on, weren't you on my show a while ago and you did basically back Trump? Why are you backtracking on backing Trump? I don't get it.
Well, because we're on the eve of an election. There are two candidates. It's a closely fought election. Whoever is leader of this party needs to work productively with that person. Just look at the mess that Keir Starmer has got himself into now, where he's got his team supporting one candidate, harmed that relationship, and that's bad for the United Kingdom, isn't it? Because our national security, our defence, our trade, so much depends on our relationship with the US. I'm not going to compromise that.
What did you make of the protests on the streets of London yesterday in favour of Tommy Robinson?
Look, I do not support that man. We should call out thuggery and violence and racism wherever we find it.
Is he a fascist?
He has said some things which I find abhorrent. And my approach to these issues is call out the far right just as strongly as I would call out the sectarian gangs on the other side of the coin. Extremism, racism, abuse is wrong. We should never be selective or squeamish in the way that we do that.
But do you have any sympathy with protesters talking about two-tier policing, that their concerns about immigration aren't being listened to?
I do, of course. I think that I'm very concerned about creeping two-tier policing. We've seen that on a number of levels in recent times. I was very worried about the way in which some sections of society have reacted, for example, to the Chris Cabba case. Where politicians like Sadiq Khan said that he mourned the death of someone who's a gangster. A man who'd been on a one-man crime spree, stabbing and shooting and committing criminality.
He didn't know that at the time, did he?
Well, we don't know that, do we? He has responsibility for policing, so I suspect he knew rather a lot about that case. But we should be backing police firearms officers. They're heroes. They deserve our support.
Mr. Jenrick, we need to leave it there. Good luck on
Thank you very
Thursday
much.
and next
Thank
week.
you.
We look forward to having you back, come what may.
I'll be delighted
Good luck
either
to
way.
you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick's opponents coming up next. Don't go anywhere because we've got that to come. I'm also going to be speaking to Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, about Wednesday's budget. It's not looking great for taxpayers. How does she answer my questions, I wonder? Let's see, we did the pre-record earlier.
We could be delivering the perfect Christmas to you this year. First, we'll give you £20,025 in tax-free cash. Then we'll give you £5,000 to spend on all of your Christmas presents, with a further £500 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. Finally, a GB News Christmas goodie bag. You'll get it all in time for the big day. For your chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Oedipus is back in the theatre, as Stefan Kyriazis can tell me. Stefan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
A good Oedipus or a bad one?
It's a great one. It's divided the critics a little bit. So some would prefer more kind of truth to the original text, perhaps a little bit more sense of the kind of epic Greek tragedy. I mean, this is Sophocles. It's 2,500 years old, and it's still one of the best, literally, no pun, the mother of all tragedies. It's just absolutely staggering. You like that?
I did. Where and with whom?
So this one is on at the Wyndham Theatre until January the 4th. The exciting thing is Mark Strong as Oedipus, Leslie Manville as his wife, Jocasta, and it's been reframed, you'll see from the pictures, as a modern political thriller. So he is waiting for election results, general election results, you will remember. There's a clock ticking down in the background. They're at Campaign HQ. They're waiting for it to click down to 0. We increasingly know that when it hits 0, terrible truths are coming. So it's operating on 2 levels. He's obsessed with the truth. He says very famously, "I am me." He's so proud of his sense of who he is. And, of course, that's all going to be horrendously ripped away. Mark Strong is wonderful. And then when we get to the very end and the horrific final reveal, I forgot. I was so gripped in the political thriller and everything else, I actually swore under my breath in the theatre, Michael, because I just had been so engrossed, and they play very well at other mysteries going on and a family drama, that when my penny dropped, I literally was devastated, and they do it. Even the critics that haven't loved this reframing admit, the two of them, and especially at the end, it's searingly agonising. It's glorious.
2,500 years later,
yeah,
it's still absolutely visceral.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
GB News, the People's Channel.
So we've spoken to Robert Jenrick. Kemi Badenoch is going to come on in just a moment. I'm also going to be speaking to the Deputy Leader of Reform, Richard Tice. But first, here's the news with Sophia Wensler.
Good morning. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. It's emerged that thousands of businesses are closing their doors due to fears Labour will impose one of the biggest corporate tax raids in history during the upcoming budget. The Telegraph is reporting that more than 1,600 company directors have chosen to wind down their businesses so far this month, the highest number of closures this year and more than double the amount for the whole of October last year. It comes as Sir Keir Starmer denied plotting a war against Middle Britain and misleading the public after promising not to raise taxes on working people in the run-up to the general election. Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves has promised £1.4 billion to rebuild crumbling schools and triple funding for free breakfast clubs as she gears up for her first budget. The Chancellor said children should not suffer for the dire state of the UK's public finances, despite Labour government needing to fill what is described as a £22 billion black hole of overspend. The US said Israel strikes on Iran should be the end of direct conflict between the two countries. Speaking after yesterday's attacks, the White House said Israel was acting in self-defence, but admits they are fully prepared to defend Israel should Iran choose to respond. It comes as Iran's president has warned against further attacks on his country. The King is set to return to overseas duties next year, including overseas tours, despite his ongoing cancer treatment. A palace official described his trip to Australia and Samoa as a perfect tonic, adding it had lifted his spirits. King Charles will fly abroad during the spring and autumn for traditional periods for official foreign royal trips, providing doctors sanction the travel. Staying with royals now, Prince William has extended what is being called an olive branch to Prince Harry by publicly naming him for the first time in 6 years.
My mother took me to the passage. She took Harry and I both there. It must have been about 11, I think, probably at the time, maybe 10.
14 seconds,
I'd never been to anything like that before, and I was a bit anxious as to what to expect.
That's part of a new ITV documentary following the Prince of Wales and the first year of his Homewards programme that aims to end homelessness. The film, titled Prince William, We Can End Homelessness, includes poignant, unseen photos of William and Diana at the Passage in Westminster. The statue of Winston Churchill has been barricaded off as thousands of supporters of activist Tommy Robinson marched through central London on Saturday. The statue in Parliament Square is protected by a ring of steel barriers, as the cenotaph was also sealed off. It's understood 5 arrests made yesterday. The Met says 3 of the arrests were made at the Uniting the Kingdom demonstration. The other 2 arrests were made at the Stand Up to Racism counter-protest. And to the US now, where Michelle Obama has used her first appearance on the campaign trail alongside Vice President Kamala Harris to attack Donald Trump. The former First Lady urged Americans to cast their votes to protect the country from the dangers of Donald Trump. Speaking to a crowd of thousands at the event, she centred on genuine fear of how a Trump administration could impact abortion rights.
I want to think about who do you think possibly would care more about our reproductive health. And we are more than just baby-making vessels. You get to choose. You get to use your judgment and cast your vote for yourself and the women in your life. Remember, women, standing up for what is best for us.
Meanwhile, Trump has been speaking at a rally in Pennsylvania. The presidential candidate says he doesn't need Beyonce to win.
And we don't have Beyonce, who couldn't fill the arena last night. But the people went there because they thought they were going to hear Beyonce sing, right? Beyonce got out and said, "Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to endorse her." What's her name? What's her name? We're leading, but we got to close it out, right? We got to close it out. I will promise you we're going to end inflation very quickly. We're going to get those prices down, too. And I'll stop the invasion of criminals pouring into our country. They're criminals, and they're pouring in like we've never seen. We're going to stop it. We're going to get them the hell out of here. And I will bring back the American dream.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Sophia. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Lovely to have your company on this Sunday morning. I'm going to be speaking to Deputy Reform Leader Richard Tice in just a moment. He was quizzing Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, in the week about two-tier justice in the UK. I'm also going to be speaking to Kemi Badenoch after Robert Jenrick accused her of taking the gloves off in the Tory leadership race. And I'll be speaking to Lord Farmer, who's the Tories' former Treasurer. He's got lots to say about the early prison release scheme, and indeed families, and whether the Tories have got enough family-friendly policies. But let's bring Richard Tice into the conversation now. Lovely to see you.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. You want to launch an assault on the budget, but we don't know what's in it. So what are your thoughts about Wednesday?
Because this budget has been so delayed and there's been so much briefings, we know that actually Labour is going to essentially, it's an assault on hard work, an assault on jobs, with freezing the thresholds, with...
they're not been confirmed, so what are you suspecting? Freezing of thresholds?
I'm expecting freezing of personal thresholds, which affects all workers, national insurance for employers, an assault on pension schemes.
Are employers working people, Richard Tice?
Yes, I mean, a small business owner who's taking risk, who's employing people, he's also a worker. He's working his or her socks off. And it's going to be an assault on small businesses. The Federation of Small Businesses is terrified. The truth is, everybody is genuinely terrified about this budget. And... you know, the reality, what we have to change the culture. You can't tax your way out of the crisis we're in. You've got to grow your way out of the crisis. We've got to celebrate working hard, making more money, taking more risk, being an entrepreneur, growing the economy. That's what we've got to do.
Labour will say, it's all very well Reform saying this, you're not in power, you haven't got 22 billion black holes to fill. You're just campaigning, you're not governing.
They made a political choice to pay more to public sector workers. That's what's created what they call a black hole. Look, the truth is that we're going to end up with, we're all going to be taxed more in order to have a bigger state, a bigger public sector, which will be more bloated, more inefficient, outcomes are worse. We're heading towards financial and cultural disaster.
Isn't that overstating it?
No,
Cultural disaster.
It is. Look, you have to change the culture of working hard, being successful, making more money is a good thing.
What do you think? Britons are lazy and that Labour is perpetuating this idea?
We've ended up with a culture for too many people where if you make money, if you're successful, if you're running a business, then you're not one of the good guys. That somehow you're just sort of... you're just in it for yourself. Actually, it's successful people who create wealth, who generate and create jobs. That's what drives growth. That's what drove growth in the 80s and 90s of 2.5% to 3.5% a year. We're miles away from that. When we had a smaller state, a state that actually worked and was efficient. We've got the worst of all worlds at the moment.
Are Reform now more inclined to go after Labour voters than Conservative voters? I say that because I think Nigel has made that point. It's kind of quite J.D. Vancian to sort of have this proposition where you are right-wing in a lot of your socially conservative social policies and culture policies. You want to talk tough on immigration, but you might, in the vein of J.D. Vance, be speaking more to the working man and women, say, for instance, when you're talking about factory closures, productivity, all of these green ideas that are going to cost jobs in the North Sea.
Absolutely. The truth is, we are the party of common sense, the party of the working class. Our main economic policy, for example, is to pay no income tax until you're earning £20,000 a year, which would free up £1,500. That would cost about 40 billion.
40 billion?
And you pay for that. First of all, we shouldn't be paying voluntary interest on all the QE money. Economists now agree with me on that.
Although you calculated that figure when interest rates were 5.5%.
No, they were 5.25%, and they're now 5%. And our numbers were based on less than 5%.
You challenged me on that last time. How much less than 5%?
Based on 4.75%.
OK, but what if interest rates by the time of the next Parliament go down to 1 or 2%?
Then we get more growth. But the point is, we shouldn't be wasting that. It's costing us billions of it. If you scrap net at zero, you save tens of billions every single year.
We'll get on to two-tier policing in just a minute, but just a quick question. You've made this point that you want to win over Tory councillors to reform. Since the last general election, the Tories have won 15 council seats in by-elections and other elections. Reform have won just 1. So why on earth would you defect to Reform when the Conservatives, weirdly, have been doing better than Reform since July the 4th?
Look, I don't think we've stood in all of those elections, but we've got, even since Nigel wrote to 1,300-odd councillors, we've had, I think, half a dozen plus have defected, lots more discussions going on. I think the truth is that they realise that many people who are what I would call real conservatives, who believe in our principles and values, realise that, frankly, the Tory party has let them down.
Well, Kemi Badenoch's coming in a minute. Is she a real conservative?
People can work that out for themselves.
Is she or not?
I don't think she is. I think she... genuinely, I think that she's, for example, she's pro-mass immigration. She hasn't talked about leaving an overseas court that we don't need to be a member of.
Oh, so you want to pin it down on the... Oh, so you think that Robert Jenrick is a real conservative, then? Because he wants to leave the ECHR?
Well, I think you've got to grow the economy. We've got to leave the ECHR.
Do you think he's a real conservative?
I think he's more real than Kemi. Yes.
We'll put this to her then. You've got to cross paths, by the way, when you leave the studio. So good luck with that. Tommy Robinson.
See, I answer your questions.
I know you do, and I appreciate that, and so do the audience. Tommy Robinson. People have been protesting in his name. What do you make of Tommy Robinson? Is he a good guy in your eyes?
No. All of that lot. We have nothing to do with them.
Even the protesters who have got banners up saying two-tier Keir. You agree with them on the policing and justice?
We agree with ourselves. I'm not aligning ourselves with Tommy Robinson's lot in any shape or form.
But tell me before we go, you've had a lot of messages, you told me before we came on air, from police officers in light of the Chris Cabba case and Martin Blake being exonerated of murder. What are they saying to you? Because I wrote my column about this on the weekend.
You did indeed. And there's a crisis of confidence in serving police officers and firearms officers about whether or not they're going to be properly protected and looked after by the Independent Office for Police Conduct and by the CPS.
Do you think the CPS has left out?
I think both of them. I challenged the Home Secretary in the Commons last week because I think that accountability includes accountability of the leadership of both those organisations. And if you've got a collapse of confidence, if you've got firearms officers laying down their weapons saying we're not going to do it, then actually I think we need new leadership in those two organisations.
Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, was wrong, wasn't he, when Chris Cabba was killed, to just express sympathy for Chris Cabba's family and not Martin Blake's?
I think Sadiq Khan's wrong on many things, including that he was wrong at the time. And I think we should have been told about Chris Cabba's past.
But the jury wasn't, because Martin Blake didn't know he was a gangster when he shot him.
Well, what he knew was that vehicle had been involved in a firearms incident the night before. That's what we knew.
Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed for joining me in the studio this morning. As I said, Kemi Badenoch is coming on next. Richard Tice has just described her as not a real conservative. I shall fill you in on what happens backstage in this break, but come back in 3 when I'll be interviewing the woman who wants to be the next Tory leader.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
There's a huge financial and mental strain for parents, but we have this system now where it talks about they bringing a family member to help, but I don't think that's happening a lot of the time. I think people are having to be off work, look after their child, and often, sorry to say, but their school always calls the mum, and then you have this situation where you have nobody to look after your child. People's grandparents don't seem to want to do it so much, and often family members aren't just down the road. So what we have is no village. And I think it's really important when you have a child that you need that village.
Are children getting more sicker than they used to be? Or is it just that we take the odd sniffle a bit more seriously now since 2020?
Yes, I do think the odd sniffle can be. I know in my school they say 3 days away, you know, the slightest little thing, and it's like...
If you have a cold?
Yeah, no, please, go in, yeah.
And 3 days off if you have a cold for a child, and we wonder why all these parents aren't at work. I think some of these figures about people who could be working and aren't working, they're not necessarily on benefits, but some of them will be people who, during the pandemic, particularly parents, decided to get a different work-life balance. They quite liked being at home, and they realised the children are benefiting from it. Do you think those people are in these statistics, Annette?
Of people staying at home with not working?
Who decided to not go back to work of working age?
Yes, I think a lot of people don't want to go into an office anymore either. They've had that little bit of freedom and they're like, I'm not going in. And I know employers are trying to get them to go in, but they just want to be at home. They want to be near their children if their children are sick, whether that's the mum or the dad. And also a lot of people don't live near their office or wherever. They don't want to commute. Train fares have gone up, so they say, well, why should I pay? So you have this whole knock-on effect throughout the economy.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth,
it's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. So we've spoken to Robert Jenrick, who's had a bit of a go, actually, at his opponent to be the next Tory leader. So let's have a chat now to Kemi Badenoch. She's also the candidate and she's the MP for North West Essex. Lovely to see you this morning.
Thank you, Camilla.
So we've
nice
had a little ding-dong going on here because of this piece on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, headlined, Badenoch, I have integrity to lead Tories, not Jenrick. And this is on the basis of an interview that you've given to the newspaper, where you've basically said that you have never been sacked, you make that point, and that there is a whiff of impropriety around Robert Jenrick because of him having to leave office. He was sacked by Boris Johnson in 2020 because of his involvement with the millionaire businessman Richard Desmond and his housing development in West Ferry. There was a suggestion that he had saved Desmond 40 million. In fact, that West Ferry development has been granted now by Tower Hamlets. But what are you trying to say here? Because he's saying that this is, your attack on him for lacking impropriety, is petty, it's disinformation, and it's garbage.
Well, what I would say to that is I was asked a question by the Telegraph and I answered it. The public don't trust Conservatives anymore. This is not a general election. This is not about how many policies and what new manifesto can be. It's about what kind of person do the party members want. And I'm talking about me. I'm somebody who has conviction. I'm not saying anything new now just because it's a leadership contest. I'm somebody who's been portraying those values for a very long time. And I also say that given the public don't trust us, you want somebody who hasn't been sacked, who hasn't had any of those sorts of issues.
All right, but are you saying
that is a difference between us?
Are you saying that he's only coming out with the cap on immigration and leaving the ECHR for expediency because he thinks it's going to win over Tory members? Are you suggesting he doesn't believe that? Because he's sat here and he seems to believe it.
It's for Tory members to decide. I never heard him say any of those things until he was ready to resign. And we all have jobs where we don't necessarily say what we think. Perhaps he has always thought those things and is saying them now. The point I'm making is that you want somebody who's going to say these things whenever it is right to do so, not just when there's a leadership contest.
OK, but then you even saying this and making this remark about impropriety does speak to this idea that you're able to start a row in an empty room, that you're combative and abrasive. He's made the point, well, how do you expect her to unify the party if this is how she talks about me?
Well, look at all the people who are supporting me, people from the left to the right of the party, brand new MPs, to people like William Hague, IDS, former party leaders, former party, chairman. The point is, all of these attacks have been thrown at me throughout the campaign, and I've said nothing. But when I'm asked a question and I answer it honestly, which I will always do, I tell the truth. Suddenly, it's open season.
I know.
I'm not really interested in talking about Rob. If I'm asked questions, I will give an answer as honest and polite as I possibly can. But I haven't said anything that is not public knowledge.
But shouldn't righties be concerned that you have won the support of wets like Michael Gove and George Osborne? I mean, Michael Gove is a sort of net zero zealot who was massively in favour of lockdown, which seemed to most people to be completely anti-conservative.
Well, so was Boris.
Well, I know. Do we even need to talk about George Osborne and how he's perceived on the sort of left to right spectrum? Some people think he's some kind of blue Labourite, he's sort of a Blairite. That's not great. Jenrick says, well, that means that you're the establishment candidate.
Well, I think that this is very interesting. There are only two candidates left, so people are going to have to pick one person. I think much of this is about the fact that someone like George Osborne, who I don't know very well, has looked at the two candidates and thought, well, this is the person who I think can win. I am winning support from left to right. I have Ian Duncan-Smith. I have Steve Baker, who used to chair the ERG. I have David Davis. So I'm winning support from everybody.
Yes.
Why can't he win support from everybody? I think that's the important thing. And I'm actually very proud that people who brought us from opposition into government think that I can do it. The people who started in opposition and got into government were Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron. They didn't do it with a new manifesto. They did it by starting from first principles. That is what I want to do. And I think it's really sad that he's having to peddle conspiracy theories. That's not really what this...
conspiracy theories are you peddling?
Well, that Michael Gove is running my campaign.
The
and
Nadine
so on.
Dorries.
Yes. My friends are running my campaign.
When's the last time you spoke to Michael Gove? Tell me honestly.
It was when the renters reform, I did a U-turn on renters reform because I didn't like what he did in the departments, and I let him know that I'm going to be U-turning.
So give me the month that you last spoke to Michael Gove.
That would have been this month. Remember, I'm following the brief that he was doing.
Has he given you any advice on your campaign at all?
None whatsoever. I'm the Shadow Housing Secretary, and I've asked him a question about stuff that he did so I can make sure I get my story straight when I'm facing off to Angela Rayner. And this is the thing, Camilla. I still have another job. I'm still the Shadow Housing Secretary. I have no civil servants helping me anymore. I have to read policy briefs. I'm still doing the COVID inquiry. I'm still doing the post office inquiry. So I'm doing all this while running a leadership campaign. People are throwing lots of mud. And the one time that I say, well, you want somebody who's tough, who has conviction, who's got integrity, I don't think that that's an issue. I think it's important people hear that.
The counter-argument to you having conviction would be a little bit like Richard Tice said here. Well, if you're such a kind of Thatcherite conservative, then why aren't you putting your name to policies like capping immigration and indeed leaving the ECHR? We've had this criticism by David Campbell-Bannerman, who is supporting Jenrick. He's said, missing. Have you seen Kemi's plan? Neither have we. It might be a legitimate criticism to say, well, nail your colours to some kind of policy mast. What do you stand for beyond rhetoric?
Well, people can look at my record and see what I stand for. I am a net zero skeptic, not a climate change skeptic, but I think we got that wrong. We need to have a proper plan. What people like Richard Tice don't understand, because he's not that experienced a politician, he wasn't even doing that well in his party until Nigel Farage came back and started running things. What he doesn't understand is that you have to take people with you. And sometimes you have to be pragmatic. Simply talking and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. That's what we did before, and nothing happened. We said we were going to cap migration to tens of thousands, and it didn't happen. The important question is, why didn't it happen? We got some things wrong. We've got to go back, work up a plan that will actually deliver, not just talking. Talking is not how to get things done. I'm an engineer. A lot of these people are just talking politicians.
The criticism is, OK, but you have done a lot of talking, but you haven't laid out a plan. So you're saying, I need to become leader and then I'm going to map out a plan.
No.
People are saying, why haven't you got a plan already? You must have a plan.
We have a direction. But the party has been divided. There's no point someone saying, well, here's my plan, everybody's got to suck up to it. This is how we got into this position in the first place. You need to have an internal debate in your party. You need to build a consensus. Simply saying my way or the highway, I'm going to make sure my shadow cabinet sign up to this, at this point, will just end up having another leader being kicked out. So if you can do better than that.
So if you can build consensus, for instance, around leaving the ECHR, you will do it?
Yes, well, I've said this already, that leaving the ECHR is not something I'm against. In fact, we probably will have to do it. But it is not a silver bullet. If we left it today, and I think I said this on your show previously, it was in my Telegraph article a couple of weeks ago, if we left today, we would not deport any more people. There are other problems. The Human Rights Act, the legal activism, the people in the Home Office who don't want to do this.
Well, is it the Human Rights Act that needs to be rewritten?
I would certainly start there. I would certainly start there.
Rewriting it?
It's not about scrapping every single thing. Scrapping things creates problems elsewhere. We need to look at these things, figure out how we can reform. It might be that we need a whole new piece of legislation, but this is what we need to work out. We cannot win the next election by me pulling out some thoughts from my head between July and now and saying, here's my plan. But that is not how you do it.
Another Tice criticism is that you are pro-mass migration. And
That's nonsense.
Well, let me just cite an example, because you once welcomed the then Home Secretary for removing the annual limits on work visas and international students. So if you wanted those work visas, and indeed visas for international students and indeed their dependents have been a massive thorn in the side of the Home Office. That's one of the reasons why these immigration figures have gone up. So where do you stand on migration?
That was 6 years ago. That was while we were still in the EU. And one of the points I was making was that we were delivering a skills-based, points-based migration system. And if we were going to do that, then we needed to make sure that the people who were the best could come in. What was happening at the time was that there was a cap. Good people weren't coming in, and the people that we didn't necessarily want were. And I was saying, let's remove the cap and use this points-based system to decide who comes in. I still think that that's the right thing to do. Make sure that the people who are coming here are the highly skilled people that are needed, not just whoever can figure out how to work the system.
Okay.
That is not being pro-mass migration. The people who are in my constituency who are asking for that were the Wellcome Institute. These are very, very first-class international institutions that are delivering great breakthroughs in pharmaceuticals, on health. We want the people who can do that to come in, but what we don't want is what we're seeing, small boats, lots of low-skilled people and their dependents. So I won't shy away from that. But taking a clip from 6 years ago and saying, ooh, look, she's pro-mass migration is not serious. We have to get serious.
All right. You've been compared to Margaret Thatcher. In fact, Simon Heffer's written a piece today, who was personal friends with her, saying that you're like her, and yet your detractors say you're not good at taking advice, that you can be arrogant and not listen. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that I can't respond to anonymous detractors. If people have something to say...
We'll say that general thing. I mean, it's a pattern.
Yes.
Lots of people have expressed concerns just generally about, you know, just are you a bit too sure of yourself? Are you a bit too sort of reluctant to listen to what other people are telling you, and sometimes you can go off track?
Well, what I will say is that in order to lead a party, you need to be very confident. I have a team working with me. This is not just me. It's why my campaign isn't called Kemi for Leader, it's called Renewal 2030. It's MPs, former MPs, people who have the same shared sense of direction as I do. So, of course, I have to listen. I wouldn't have got anything done in government if I didn't listen to other people. The best advice often comes from others. What happens is when people have bad advice and terrible ideas and you disagree with them, they say, oh, well, she didn't take my advice. I can't listen to everybody. Every leader will have 100 different people saying 100 different things. The best leaders are the ones who can work out what is good, follow that and deliver.
Okay.
That's what I do.
If you're a woman of conviction, why won't you say now that you prefer Donald Trump to be the next US president to Kamala Harris? And I say that just because Kamala, with her kind of word salad, sort of virtue-signalling wokery, I'd imagine is anathema to you.
The reason why I won't say so is because whoever wins, I will have to work with. This is not a pub quiz. This is not a game. We are dealing with countries that are trying to destabilise the West. We need to work well with the US. Popping up and down saying, oh, well, I like this person or that person, that is not serious. I'm going to need to work with whoever leads. And I had this as Trade Secretary, where I had to work with people who were from other political parties and views than mine. Being able to work across those divides is going to be key if you're leader. I'm not an activist or a campaigner. I am campaigning for a very serious job. And I've said that I like them both equally. I will work equally with both of them. But this is not about who I personally prefer. That is not serious politics.
If Rachel Reeves does put up employer national insurance contributions on Wednesday, as has been heavily briefed into the papers, will she be responsible for a manifesto pledge breach?
Yes, she will be. Because they said that they were not going to put up those taxes, and they clearly are doing so. This is what we were warned during the election, that Labour don't have a plan. They are making it up as they go along. They don't understand how things work. They are all civil servants rather than people who've run businesses, worked in the private sector. That is their background, and they're going to make things a lot worse.
OK. Kemi Badenoch, good luck. I think the voting finishes on Thursday, on Halloween, and then the next Tory leader will be announced on Saturday. So wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. All right, coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the former Conservative Party Treasurer and peer, Lord Farmer, and we've got that interview that I recorded earlier with Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. Stay tuned for it. It's good stuff. We have quite the debate over what a working person actually is. Join us in a bit.
Good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. It's going to be turning cloudy across the northwest with outbreaks of rain, but brighter elsewhere after a rather chilly start to the day. But it has been a bright start to the day, and we'll hold on to a lot of sunshine, especially across England and Wales through today and into the afternoon. Blustery showers across the north of Scotland, but further towards the west across Northern Ireland, northwestern Scotland, turning gloomy with outbreaks of rain that could turn heavy and persistent persistent at times. Otherwise, temperatures are a notch down compared to Saturday, highs of up to 13 or 14 degrees in the sunshine towards the south. So as we go through Sunday evening, bands of rain are going to continue to push their way eastwards. Again, still staying heavy across northwestern parts of Scotland, drier the further east you go. A damp end to the weekend then across much of Northern Ireland with heavy spells of rain. This will gradually push into parts of Cumbria as well to give it quite a murky end to the weekend. But further towards the south and east, holding on to some early evening sunshine here and largely dry to start. But as we go through Sunday night, turning increasingly cloudy from the north with outbreaks of rain sinking south and eastwards. So many places tonight holding on to a lot of cloud with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. But that will lead in to a largely milder night than the night just gone, with lows around 9 or 10 degrees. So as we start the new working week, it is going to be a murky picture out there. We've got a lot of cloud across much of the country with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The rain may persist across parts of Wales. There may be some glimmers of sunshine, especially towards the south and across eastern areas, but otherwise the temperatures are generally going to be around average for the time of year at around 14 or 15 degrees. Bye-bye.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by the former Tory party treasurer and now Conservative peer, Lord Michael Farmer, also a GB News shareholder is the best way to describe you, Lord Farmer. Yeah. Right, first of all, come on, I want an exclusive on the GB News station on the Camilla Tominey Show. Who are you going to back in the leadership? Because I know you've heard both interviews, I think, with Jenrick.
I know, well, the last time when you asked me when there were 5 candidates, I said no one.
Yeah.
Today, I'm going to support Kemi.
Are you? Why?
I think she has the basic core values of conservatism, actually, and that's what we need at the present time. This is a crunch moment. I mean, you can look at Labour, you can look at Tories at the moment, and there's really not that much between them.
Yes.
But the whole area of the core values,
yeah,
you know, personal responsibility, families,
yes,
national rights, if you like,
yes,
social, a good society. I think she's got those in her, which I don't think Robert Jenrick, it doesn't come out of him so much. And I mean, I just saw her just now and she was saying about getting the right people around her. I mean, if she becomes leader, she will need help, and she will need good help.
Yes.
So it's going to be very important if she does become leader, who are there to advise her and guide her along in these first couple of years.
Well, IDS is backing her and you were backing IDS as an interim leader, so maybe that's good news.
I think our IDS is a first-class person to advise her. He has experience and maturity.
We have to expedite this interview because I've got Bridget Phillipson pre-recorded and we don't want to miss any of it because I do hammer her somewhat on what's being predicted to be in next week's budget.
Okay.
So let's talk about crowded prisons.
Yeah.
You're a kind of prison reform campaigner. What's your concern?
Well, the reason prisons are crowded, apart from the population roaring up, and we live in a sort of age of lawlessness, and it takes 5 years to build a decent prison, is that we've had penal populism, and particularly in an election year, you've had politicians fighting to be the hard, tough ones on criminals.
Yeah.
Okay, so longer and longer sentences, sentence inflation. And
we want shorter sentences for non-violent criminals.
I think there is a review being chaired by which Labour is starting under David Gauke, which is going to look at sentencing, and that's very important. Sentence inflation for the last 15 years, some of them have doubled, particularly the longer things.
This is weird because people have the perception that people don't get long enough for very serious crimes.
I know. If you read the Daily Mail, things like joint enterprise, all right?
Yeah.
Do you know what joint enterprise is? If you've got a group of people and somebody knifes somebody, the whole group can be sentenced to the same sentence, which can sometimes be 18 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
We need to look at that.
OK, so you're advocating prison population review. And also, you want to speak to me about, just briefly, hospices and the assisted dying bill. Yeah, well, this word dignity, which is the people who are proposing what I call assisted suicide, frankly, they sort of cottoned onto this word. But there's two types of dignity. There is intrinsic dignity, which every human being has. You have it, I have it. The man who is dying and he's lost control over his functions, he's dribbling, he has dignity because he's a human being. And the hospice movement, Cecily Saunders started it, says, we will look after you until you die. Now, attributed dignity is when you're looking at the man with the dribbling and the incontinence and saying, do you really want to live? Yeah. That particular moment when you're taking away his dignity, I disagree with. So do you advocate more funding for hospice care rather than assisted suicide? Hospices assist the dying to die. They're already there doing the job, so help them to do it. Certainly the government funding with partnership with the voluntary sector, it works very well. All right, Lord Farmer, I'm sorry I've had to rush this interview a bit, but
don't worry, it's good to be with you again.
You've got the points across that you want to make, and we'll have you back on to have you for a little longer. Well, thank you very much indeed. As I say, coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. We will be back in 3. Don't go anywhere. It's a cracking interview.
Budget Day on GB News on Wednesday. Stay with us all day for the most anxiously anticipated budget in a generation.
Morning through to evening, we'll be here with insight and analysis, crunching the numbers
as we work out the cost to the country and, most importantly, to you.
Because the Chancellor has a bill to pay. The question is,
who's going to pay it? Budget Day all day Wednesday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's News Channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Some controversial film news. Someone has hired an actor who's white. What the hell is going on?
Let me just fix my hair. Let me just come on. So, Wuthering Heights film stirs controversy after white actor, he's white, chosen to play Heathcliff.
Is that your Humza Yusuf impersonator?
That is, that's my Chinese accent. Experts have gone, oh no, there's a lot of, in recent years, he's definitely black or mixed race because he was found in Liverpool. And as you know, everybody in Liverpool is black or mixed race.
No, I mean, have you read the novel?
God, no.
Right, well, I have. And the novel itself does say, quite explicitly, that he is dark-skinned. Yeah. That the implication is that he's of Romani origin. So he wouldn't be whiter than white, you know. So, I mean...
that's fine. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that casting... But on the other hand...
This guy's Spanish. His origin's Spanish.
Do you remember when there was a black Anne Boleyn for a Channel 5 miniseries? That seems to be more egregious, because, I tell you what, Anne Boleyn definitely wasn't black.
You racist. No, I almost feel sorry in this story because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't now. Because if they'd have, it's not like he's a bit of an anti-hero, right? It's not like a good all-round.
He's not a good guy.
So if you go, right, we definitely need to cast someone black for this. What? Why are you picking just black people to play someone with so many character flaws? Or you go, why?
Like they did with Darth Vader.
Yes, that's right.
He was played by the Green Cross Code Man. Okay. Just the voice was done by...
That's true. Yeah. Yes, it was the Green Cross Code Man. I wonder what they were saying there.
Have you ever seen the videos of the original audio Star Wars?
No.
So you've got... I can't remember his name, but you've got the Green Cross Code Man going like, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Yeah. No, Luke, I am your father.
They should have left it as it was.
This is the difference to me. We're talking about Star Wars. You're like, oh, have you read Bronte, Wuthering, whatever?
She only wrote one novel, Josh. You could... do with the courtesy of reading it.
I'll read it straight after I finish your one.
And it's actually brilliant.
The People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Now, earlier on I spoke with the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. Let's hear what she had to say. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, joins me now in the GB News studio ahead of the big budget on Wednesday. Lovely to see you, Minister. Thank you very much for coming in person. Let's talk about this confusion around working people. I know you've been asked it before, but let's just try and go over it, because in the manifesto, page 19, it says, we will ensure taxes on working people are kept as low as possible. Labour will not increase taxes on working people, which is why we will not increase national insurance, the basic higher or additional rates of income tax or VAT. It's been heavily trailed that Rachel Reeves, your colleague, the Chancellor, is going to increase national insurance by 1 to 2%. So that's a breach of the manifesto, isn't it?
We hold to our manifesto commitment, and what your viewers will see is that in their pay slips coming out of the budget, they won't face higher taxes, because we will not increase VAT, national insurance or income tax on people who go out to work for a living.
But you are going to increase it on employers?
On the wider measures within the budget, you'll appreciate that there's only a couple of days left to go, and I can't speculate really on what might or might not be within the Chancellor's budget.
OK, all of the papers are full of briefings, front of the Sunday Times, front of the Telegraph. Nobody is guiding against this idea that I think the Times floated in the week, that employer national insurance contributions will go up by up to 2%. So if we can just agree, because nobody in the Labour press office has briefed against it, that NICs by employers are going up. You've said that national insurance isn't going up. It is going to go up. So in my mind, that's a manifesto breach.
It will be more than my job is worth to come on your programme and set out what the Chancellor will say on Wednesday.
But if national insurance goes up...
It's only a matter of days. So on Wednesday, the Chancellor will set out all of the spending and taxation measures in the budget. We do face some tough choices because of the very, very difficult inheritance that we have from the Conservatives. But this budget is about how we fix the foundations of our economy. And where it comes to education, I can think of no better place to start than with our children's life chances.
We'll definitely get on to education, because I know there's some money set aside for infrastructure, and that could be the rebuilding of schools. But just on this national insurance point, we must nail this down, because Labour came into government promising change, promising not to hoodwink the electorate. We've got a manifesto here clearly saying that national insurance is not going to be increased. And we've got briefings out of Labour that national insurance is going to be increased on employers. So it's a manifesto breach. We have to just be honest about it. Times are tough. Employers' NICs will go up. So it's not quite as the manifesto promised the electorate.
I appreciate that it's frustrating that I can't comment on wider measures in the budget, but we haven't got long to wait. The Chancellor will set out everything on Wednesday. What our manifesto was clear about was that we didn't want working people to face higher taxes. We hold to that, and they will not see increases in VAT, in national insurance or in income tax. And coming out of the budget, when they receive their pay slip, they will not see higher taxes as a result.
What's your definition of a working person?
Someone whose main income comes from going out to work and as a result of their efforts.
Because Starmer was asked whether somebody who works but gets their income from assets as well as shares and property was a working person. He said, well, this will not come within my definition. I think people watching this will know whether they're in that group or not. So let's take a teacher who might happen to have a rental flat that they let out as a landlord, or even a teacher that has some shares, which I don't think is unlikely. That could happen, right? Is that teacher a working person?
Teachers are working people, but, you know, again, you're asking me to speculate on wider measures.
No, I'm just asking you what a working person is.
A working person is someone whose main income is derived from going out to work.
OK, so how about your colleague Jas Athwal, who is the newly elected MP for Ilford South? He owns 15 rental flats, making him the biggest landlord in the House of Commons. He's also an MP. Is he a working person?
Anyone who goes out to work for a living is, by definition, I think, a working person.
But he derived most of his income from these 15 rental flats.
But I do agree that you will often see people, not necessarily those who have big incomes, who will have investments, whether that's in, for example, property or elsewhere.
But you just said that if somebody derives most of their income from shares or property, then they are not the working person that somebody who derives most of their income from their paycheck is.
And what I'm talking about is VAT, national insurance and income tax.
But hang on, this is a really good
manifesto.
example. So Jas Athwal clearly makes more money from 15 rental flats than he does being paid as an MP.
Well, I've no idea how much he earns, but
it must be more than the average MP salary, right? He's got 15 rental flats. So is Jas Athwal a working person in Labour's definition?
People who go out to work for a living will not see increases in the budget in VAT,
even if they own 15 rental flats
and income tax.
So somebody like Jas Athwal, who works for a living but also earns 15 rental flats, won't be adversely affected by the budget.
I know it's frustrating that I can't answer directly some of the questions about what measures will or won't be in the budget, but honestly, it's not long to wait. The Chancellor will set it all out.
Let's talk about schools. You tweeted, our state schools need teachers more than private schools need embossed stationery. Our children need mental health support more than private schools need new pools. Our students need careers advice more than private schools need AstroTurf pitches. You were then pictured yourself playing on an AstroTurf pitch at a private school. I think you play hockey in your spare time. Do you regret that tweet that was heavily criticised when you posted it?
I do think our state schools urgently need investment, so no, I don't. And what I was reflecting was the frankly ludicrous comments of some people connected to private schools about the choices that they were facing, choices actually that state schools have faced consistently over the last 14 years. I do play hockey. Sadly, we didn't have a game this week, so I haven't been playing. But
you were lucky to benefit from that AstroTurf pitch that was at a private school.
Well, I play away fixtures, and it's for our opposition to choose where they hold their fixtures.
I know, but it's good that private schools lend out their facilities.
Well, it's not for free
for others.
Well,
yes.
yeah, they charge. This is not for free.
But isn't that an example of a private school sort of sharing in their own privileges?
It's an example of a private
school.
school.
So that you can play hockey at the AstroTurf pitch of a private school in the evening.
No, it's an example of a private school deriving income from the facilities that they hold, and that's absolutely right. They're private businesses. I would expect them to do so.
Do you think that private schools are facing straitened times because they spend money on embossed stationery, AstroTurf and pools? Or could private schools have also been disadvantaged by the cost of living crisis?
I think private schools, like all businesses, can make choices about how they spend their money.
Do you think their energy bills might have gone up in the last couple of years, though?
I imagine so, but their fees have certainly gone up way beyond that over the course of the last decade or so. So it's not just directly connected to recent cost of living pressures. They've made choices about how they invest their money. That's their right as private businesses. The choice that we're making, however, is that we believe we should invest in state education, and we'll do so by imposing VAT on the fees that they charge. I think that's a straight-up political choice. The majority of your viewers will send their kids to state schools. What they want to see is investment in our state schools. And what I'm setting out today is how we will make sure we invest in our crumbling schools estate, how we prioritise protecting education spending, our priorities within the budget.
But the money that's going to be raised by the VAT on private school fees, it's been calculated, will amount to one extra teacher for every 4 state schools. Is that a good return, do you think, for all of the controversy that the policy has attracted?
So what this involves, the 6,500, is about how we fill those vacancies that we have there already and temporarily filled posts, because in lots of schools across the country we have got vacancies, especially in specialisms like maths and science, and all too often children are being taught by people who are not expert in their field, especially in disadvantaged communities. That has a really big impact on children's life chances. The value that comes from having a brilliant, well-supported teacher at the front of the classroom is immeasurable. And that's the choice that we're making to ensure that all children get a brilliant education. It's just a straight-up political choice.
I can understand the political argument for the policy, but what I'm saying is if it's only one teacher for every 4 state schools, that's not a brilliant return, not least if the IFS is to be believed and that they're now predicting that 90,000 pupils could end up in the state sector. You're then going to have bigger class sizes, and you're only going to have one teacher for every 4 schools to compensate for it.
So the IFS report that you mentioned, what they concluded is that when you take account of all factors, this policy will raise £1.3 to £1.5 billion net. So that's taking account of any potential change. So this does raise a considerable sum of money that we believe we should invest in our state schools because we know the pressures that they're under. We believe that all children in our state schools deserve a great start in life. And one of the ways that we will do that is by ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy.
But specifically, one teacher for every 4 schools isn't much, is it?
Well, as I've explained, it's about filling those gaps, particularly around areas of shortage, which are areas like maths and science, where increasingly children are being taught by teachers who are having to step in and cover for their colleagues because we haven't got the specialists we need, and it's about addressing that.
I've asked you this before, but maybe you can address it this time. You've talked about more mental health support in state schools. Will you provide mental health support to private school pupils whose parents can no longer afford the fees?
We want to make sure that mental health support is there for all of our children and for adults too, because it's a big problem across our country. It's a good thing that we talk about our mental health more openly than was the case before, but unfortunately NHS support hasn't caught up with that shift in public opinion.
Do you accept that the mental health of private school pupils might suffer if they're plucked from the classes and the friends that they know because of this policy? Can you accept that, not just as a politician, but perhaps also as a parent?
Well, of course, there's no guarantee that this will all be passed on to parents because private schools can make choices about fee levels. And actually, in recent years, it's been private schools that have been pushing out children and parents because of the big increases in fees that we've seen in recent years. And no, of course, I wouldn't want to see disturbance to children's education, but schools have got choices and parents, of course, can make choices about how they spend their income.
One further question just about Rachel Reeves as she's got her big moment on Wednesday. According to the Guido Fawkes website, which is perhaps not one that you particularly read that often, but it seems to suggest that Rachel Reeves has described herself as working as an economist for the Bank of England, but in fact, she wasn't really working there as an economist. She was working in a mundane support department. This was both at the Bank of England but also at HBOS. She over-exaggerated her credentials.
I very much doubt that. She is fiercely intelligent, had a really brilliant career behind her before she became an MP, and that's why it stands her in such good stead to be Chancellor and to deliver the budget on Wednesday.
You're not worried about these forecasts of doom on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, then, that lots of businesses are already thinking of closing down or indeed employing fewer staff because of the proposed rise to employers' NICs?
Our focus on the budget is about growth. I mean, I am worried about the state of the economy, and that's why this budget is about fixing those foundations to give us more stability, to support businesses to grow and to invest. But, you know, we do face some tough choices as a country, but this is about how we fix those foundations, how we drive forward and make sure we've got investment coming into Britain. We had the investment summit just recently where we saw businesses recognising that actually the stability that's come in recent months under this new government allows them to make longer-term decisions, which isn't the situation we've had in recent years.
OK, well, we'll watch the budget on Wednesday with a great deal of interest. Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much for your time this morning. The Education Secretary for that. What have we learned today, then? We've learnt that Robert Jenrick thinks that Kemi Badenoch is petty, spreading disinformation and garbage. We've learnt that Richard Tice thinks that Kemi Badenoch is not a proper Tory and is an advocate of mass migration. We've heard from Lord Farmer about assisted dying and why more should be done to help hospices, help people through their dying days and hours. And we've heard from the Education Secretary as to what a working person is or isn't, but I don't know about you, I've got no more clarity on that issue. We'll be back next week to probe more politicians, but up next it's Emily Carver, who's covering for Michael Portillo. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll see you next week.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. It's going to be turning cloudy across the northwest with outbreaks of rain, but brighter elsewhere after a rather chilly start to the day. But it has been a bright start to the day, and we'll hold on to a lot of sunshine, especially across England and Wales through today and into the afternoon. Blustery showers across the north of Scotland, but further towards the west across Northern Ireland, northwestern Scotland, turning gloomy with outbreaks of rain that could turn heavy and persistent at times. Otherwise, temperatures are a notch down compared to Saturday, highs of up to 13 or 14 degrees in the sunshine towards the south. So as we go through Sunday evening, bands of rain are going to continue to push their way eastwards. Again, still staying heavy across northwestern parts of Scotland, drier the further east you go. A damp end to the weekend then across much of Northern Ireland with heavy spells of rain. This will gradually push into parts of Cumbria as well to give it quite a murky end to the weekend. But further towards the south and east, holding on to some early evening sunshine here and largely dry to start. But as we go through Sunday night, turning increasingly cloudy from the north with outbreaks of rain sinking south and eastwards. So many places tonight holding on to a lot of cloud with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. But that will lead in to a largely milder night than the night just gone, with lows around 9 or 10 degrees. So as we start the new working week, it is going to be a murky picture out there. We've got a lot of cloud across much of the country with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The rain may persist across parts of Wales. There may be some glimmers of sunshine, especially towards the south and across eastern areas, but otherwise the temperatures are generally going to be around average for the time of year at around 14 or 15 degrees. Bye-bye.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're giving you the chance to win everything you need to celebrate the festivities. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag.